Cairo had recently turned 18. Her parents, who often travelled abroad, left her to live alone in a large house. Although I miss them, my love for literature fills the void. Cairo had one dream: to become a beloved writer. And today, something new was about to happen in her life. She was going to meet the writer who had inspired her most, Jonathan, a teacher who lived in the distant town where she studied. Cairo always arrived at class early, which surprised Jonathan. "Where do you live, Cairo?" As they talked, Jonathan became amazed at how much Cairo had read. "You've devoured the entire curriculum." "I just love reading." Winnie, a fellow student, interrupted the conversation, whisking Jonathan away for a talk. "Jonathan, can I talk to you for a moment?" Despite their brief interaction, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about Cairo and her passion for his books. Jonathan's friend, Boris, soon realized Jonathan was reading Cairo's book. "It's amusing that a young girl's book could captivate you, Jonathan. The plot is quite vulgar." Cairo, meanwhile, loved reading Jonathan's work and admired his writing deeply. Jonathan, who lived with his wife Beatrice, shared with her that his student was reading his book. "It's been years since you've written anything new, Jonathan. You've been so focused on teaching." One afternoon, while the teachers were taking a break, Boris asked whether they believed ghosts lived in the nearby forest. "Do you guys think ghosts live in that forest over there?" Just as he spoke, Cairo emerged from the trees, offering cookies to the group. Jonathan couldn't take his eyes off her. Winnie, trying to capture Boris's attention, directly stated her interest in him. "Hey Boris, I'm really interested in you." Cairo, meanwhile, confessed to Winnie that she was struggling to find a topic for her next book. "I'm really struggling to find a topic for my next book." "Why not write about your experiences with teachers? None of them have any serious relationships." That day, Cairo spent the rest of her time reading Jonathan's book. During class, her friend encouraged her to spend more time with Jonathan after school. "You should spend more time with Jonathan after school." In Cairo's mind, all she wanted was Jonathan's attention. Jonathan, meanwhile, invited her to a poetry circle, mentioning that he had read her recent work and was impressed. "I'd like to invite you to a poetry circle. I've read your recent work and I'm impressed." "Thank you, my inspiration came from your books." Jonathan suggested she write her next story in the style of her favorite author. "You should write your next story in the style of your favorite author. I've finished reading your entire book. Here are some of my favorite lines." Cairo even quoted some of her favorite lines, which took Jonathan by surprise. Their conversation was interrupted when Winnie entered the room and the moment was lost. "Hey, what are you two talking about?" The next day, Cairo attended the writer's circle, feeling that something significant was about to happen. "Cairo, it's great to see you here." During the session, a young man read his work, but Cairo's attention was solely on Jonathan. The following morning, she brought coffee for the teachers and Boris teased her, asking why she seemed so curious about his cookies. "Cairo, why do you seem so curious about my cookies?" He never revealed his secret, leaving Winnie to joke that maybe they could sell the recipe one day. "Maybe we could sell the recipe one day." As the day progressed, Winnie noticed how often Jonathan and Cairo communicated. "You know, Cairo, you should make the first move and seduce Jonathan." "I don't know if I should." Their conversation was interrupted when Boris joined them, eager to share that he had decided to sell his cookies after all.
Guess what? I've decided to sell my cookies after all.
That afternoon, Jonathan called Cairo, promising to visit her before he left for vacation with his wife. "Cairo, I'll visit you before I leave for vacation with Beatrice." Cairo reflected on the nature of love, thinking that real love was quiet and inevitable. A few hours later, Jonathan arrived at Cairo's house. "Hi, Jonathan." She greeted him, dressed in a white dress, and everything seemed to freeze as he watched her. She beckoned him closer, but Jonathan remained still. Finally, Cairo took the first step, kissing him. Afterward, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about her. Messages from Cairo kept flooding his phone, much to the annoyance of Beatrice, who noticed his distraction. "Jonathan, what's going on with you? You seem so distracted." Jonathan retreated to the barn, where he began reading Cairo's new book. He became engrossed, imagining himself as the protagonist, unable to resist the magnetic pull of the character, who, in his mind, was clearly based on him. The next day, Cairo sensed something different about Jonathan. "Jonathan, is something wrong?" Jonathan brushed it off, suggesting she choose a new author to admire. "Maybe you should choose a new author to admire, Cairo." Cairo responded by reminding him that he had once asked her to write about what she knew best. "You once told me to write about what I know best." Jonathan asked if she truly knew what she was talking about, and Cairo answered with conviction. Do you really know what you're talking about? Yes, I do. My story is about two people who defy societal norms, just like us. Cairo knew that the book she was working on was too adult for her age, but she was sure it was something special. She felt afraid, though not entirely because of the content. Things between her and Jonathan were no longer just student and teacher. Jonathan tried to explain that their relationship needed boundaries, that she was his student and he, her teacher. Yet Cairo insisted on acknowledging the quality of the work, despite Jonathan's reluctance to admit it. She accused Jonathan of lacking ambition, of being capable of much more, but now, in her eyes, he had become irresponsible. Before leaving, Cairo placed her story in a box meant for the administration. Later that evening, she met up with her friend Winnie, who asked if Cairo truly liked Jonathan. Cairo called him a mere imitation of sushi dressings, something artificial and simple, but confessed that she loved him nonetheless. Meanwhile, Beatrice had discovered that Jonathan's student had written something significant, though he didn't admit to her who it was. The story piqued her curiosity, but Jonathan refused to reveal any details. Cairo, on the other hand, encouraged Winnie to text Boris. She did, and Boris soon visited Jonathan and Beatrice's home. Beatrice noticed how Boris was constantly texting someone but refused to say who it was, steering the conversation in a different direction. Things took a turn when Jonathan was called by the administration, accused of inappropriate behavior with Cairo. Beatrice warned him that he could lose not just his job, but much more. She urged him to tell the truth, but Jonathan swore that nothing had happened between him and Cairo. The next day, Cairo tried to manipulate Jonathan into feeling guilty, but he remained cold and distant. Later, Cairo went to the school director and shared her version of events. Jonathan was fortunate. Their stories aligned just enough for him to escape punishment. When asked directly if anything romantic had occurred between them, Cairo denied it, though Jonathan wasn't sure what to make of her answer. It left him deeply unsettled. During a break, Boris realized that Jonathan had developed feelings for Cairo. He observed Jonathan's struggle to maintain professional boundaries, understanding that Jonathan was in dangerous territory, tempted to cross a line that could ruin everything. At home, Beatrice questioned Jonathan more deeply, but she didn't believe his lies. Eventually, he couldn't deny it any longer. There was a spark between him and Cairo, and Beatrice knew it. That was the final straw for her, and she decided to file for divorce. Winnie, learning about the situation, confronted Cairo, begging her not to destroy Jonathan's life out of revenge. She argued that Cairo was only doing this because Jonathan had rejected her. Winnie stood up for Jonathan, insisting that Cairo was lying. Cairo, however, wasn't fazed by Winnie's words. She simply responded that Winnie had no power to stop her. By the time Cairo finished writing her book about her and Jonathan, things had spiraled out of control. The story ended on a dark note for Jonathan, with his life forever changed by the choices he had made. And that wraps up the story. Let us know in the comments how you would rate this film, or if you have anything interesting to add. Stay tuned for more content, and see you next time.